fools, we know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, today the show has moved on to Belfast. There are still some very big legal questions about Rishi Sunak's agreement. Will the DUP agree to the deal? That's the big debate we're going to have today. We'll also look at a Court of Appeal judgment today surrounding Brexit and where Russia are involved. Very interesting. We'll ask, why is it so difficult to deport foreign criminals and those who failed their asylum claims? And Tiff Needell, former racing driver and, of course, a one-time Top Gear presenter, joins me on Talking Pints. But before all of that, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story tonight. A couple that went missing with their newborn baby in January have been further arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. Constance Martin and her partner, Mark Gordon, were found in Brighton yesterday and were initially arrested on suspicion of child neglect. More than 200 police officers are searching a 91 square mile area to try to find the 2-month-old baby. Sussex police are assessing the baby's welfare on an hourly basis.
Whilst we still have hope that the baby can be found safe and well, we must retain that hope. And as you see, the number of officers we have deployed on that open search. However, as time progresses, as the weather is closing tonight, as it was last night, in terms of the coldness and the impact that would have on a baby, clearly the risk is getting higher.
Well, in other news today, the Prime Minister visited Northern Ireland to try to convince unionists to support his new trade deal with the EU. Rishi Sunak insists the so-called Windsor framework of the Northern Ireland Protocol addresses concerns around it and urged the DUP to return to power sharing at Stormont. The deal removes barriers on trade across the Irish Sea, but it still includes a role for the European Court of Justice. Tory backbenchers and the DUP are still reviewing the detail.
If there's a significant EU law that comes along that will have lasting and significant impact on the everyday lives of people here in Northern Ireland, that the Assembly will be allowed to pull the emergency brake to be crystal clear, the UK government then does have an unequivocal veto. And what I've said is that the UK government wants to sit down with the parties in Northern Ireland, the Assembly, to codify how the UK government would use that veto.
The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, there. Now, more than 100,000 civil servants are planning strike action on the day of the Chancellor's budget. Members of the Public and Commercial Services Union, which represents government departments, Border Force and the DVLA, will all walk out on the 15th of March. London Underground staff, in conjunction with unions ASLEF and the RMT, will also strike in disputes over pensions and job losses. And lastly, 3 energy firms are to bring a High Court challenge against the sale of collapsed company Bulb to Octopus Energy. Lawyers representing Scottish Power, British Gas and E.ON claim there are serious public interest and legal issues with the deal. They're challenging the government, who approved the takeover and increased a loan to help with the transfer. Bulb had 1.6 million customers when it fell into administration at the end of 2022. That's all from me. I'm back in an hour. Now, Farage.
Good evening. Well, the newspapers today were effusive in their praise of Rishi Sunak. Brexit breakthrough, Brexit done at last. The headlines were quite extraordinary. And I suppose we should celebrate, shouldn't we? I mean, after all, we can now eat the same sausages on cocktail sticks at parties in both London and Belfast. I'm being very sarcastic. I mean, the truth of it is that Northern Ireland had been left by the Conservative Party in simply the most awful place. And there is no question that Sunak's framework agreement with the European Union in terms of trade is immeasurably better than the terrible situation we were in before. There are still legal questions about the status of this agreement, how it will affect the protocol itself and indeed the treaty that we signed, leaving the European Union. There are questions around the veto, but it does seem to me that the debate is settled in that building behind me. Now, I say that, the ERG are meeting as we speak, and we'll get Jacob Rees-Mogg as soon as he leaves that room. But the real debate today has moved on to Belfast. There is one very fundamental question. Will the DUP agree to this deal? And if they do, then power sharing is going to be back. If they do, the opportunity to debate new EU laws, perhaps with a veto, we'll find out in time, will be back on the agenda. And indeed, you know, the Northern Ireland Assembly could look at the whole deal in just a couple of years' time. Will the DUP agree? Give me your views, please. Farage at gbnews.uk. Let's go straight to Belfast and let's join GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. As you say, we had the Prime Minister here today, essentially part of his sales pitch. He was in Windsor yesterday, Parliament last night, in Belfast today, primarily talking to business leaders to try and win them over to his Windsor framework. It must be said, most business leaders do seem to be on board. The big question, as you post tonight, is where are the DUP? And they are holding their cards incredibly close to their chest. And there may well be somewhat of divisions. We heard from Ian Pearsley Jr. and Sammy Wilson, 2 DUP MPs, last night suggesting this deal would not cut the mustard. That wasn't the view of Jeffrey Donaldson, the leader of the DUP today. He says, essentially, a lot has been achieved, but there are still questions outstanding. And I think we have to remember, Nigel, that this is not just all about the protocol. There's a lot of internal Northern Irish politics that plays into this as well. I think there are 3 key things. First of all, the DUP have repeatedly made it clear they're not going to work to the timetable the British government have set out around the celebrations of the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. It's clear Dublin, Brussels, London, Washington want Stormont restored by mid-April. They're saying we're not going to work on that timetable. Second of all, there are local elections here, Nigel, in May. And there is concern in the DUP that if they agree to this too soon, that they could be outflanked by people who have taken an even harder line on the protocol here in Northern Ireland and did quite well in the Assembly elections last year. And finally, I think also we have to recognise that Sinn Féin is the largest party in Northern Ireland now in terms of MLAs, and there are DUP members, let's be clear about this, who might feel a little bit uncomfortable going into government with a First Minister from Sinn Féin. So if you add all that together, it is maybe not a surprise that the DUP are not rushing into the decision on all of this.
No, I understand that, the internal politics, local elections, all of that. But Darren, you know, what was said very clearly by Sir Geoffrey Donaldson is they want to have a look at the legal texts. Do you think we're any closer to understanding whether the so-called veto really is a veto? And whether this means there is going to be fundamental treaty change?
So I think in some regards, yes, because Geoffrey Donaldson gave the impression this morning that he has at least superficially looked at this idea of the so-called storm and break, and he does seem to think that it could possibly work. But you're right, the DUP have drafted in lawyers to go through all of this. There are also questions about just how much unfettered access there will be through these green lanes. You know, they're not getting rid of customs arrangements entirely, even on the green lanes. And as you have suggested as well, there are much bigger questions about the Assembly's role in all of this, backed up, it must be said, by Westminster as well. And of course, we haven't really talked about this an awful lot, the role of the ECJ. It's meant to be only as a last resort. What again does that really practically mean? And that is where the DUP's concerns are. I think the government's strategy on all of this, which seems frankly to be working thus far, is essentially to get everyone else on board, to get the Conservative Party behind this. Clearly the opposition parties are in Westminster, as they are here in Northern Ireland, and almost to slightly isolate the DUP as the only people who might be objecting to this new protocol. Add into that, there'll be lots more money chucked at Northern Ireland as an incentive as well. But be in no doubt, the DUP aren't pushovers either. This is a party who didn't agree to the Good Friday Agreement to agree with. They're very used to, and very good, some would say, I mean that in both ways, at saying no to things. And they would insist tonight that actually if they hadn't have collapsed Stormont, Rishi Sunak wouldn't have got half of what he achieved in those negotiations with Ursula von der Leyen.
Darren, excellent. Thank you very much indeed for that great summary. James Sunderland, Conservative Member of Parliament for Bracknell, joins me here in the studio. Yes, I mean, of course, the founder of the DUP, the Reverend Ian Paisley, famously was very good at saying no. Before I get your thoughts on perhaps where the DUP might be on this, there haven't been many days when a Conservative Prime Minister has had good headlines for several years now. Was this morning, it was a sort of collective sigh of relief amongst the Parliamentary Conservative Party this morning?
Agreed. I think relief is where we are right now. There's a sense of joy, I think, also. Why? Because this has been a very difficult issue. And the statement last night was profound. It was unprecedented. And you could have heard a pin drop in the chamber. There was a sense of awe. Wow. Has he really done this? Yes, he has. The announcement came as a complete surprise to most of us there. It was supported by the SNP, supported by Labour, by the Lib Dems, and the DUP, of course, are the unknown at the moment.
Well, of course, the Labour Party and the SNP supported it, because if Brussels says it's good, they're always going to say it's good. Look, you know, I mean, the terms of trade we were left with were abominable, you know, after January the 31st, 2020, and we all know that. There's no point going back on it. We might question Boris Johnson's honesty, but there's no point. We are where we are. ERG are meeting at the moment. Do you think they will genuinely take their lead from the DUP? Or do you think even there, a number of them have been won over? I thought Steve Baker was particularly interesting in the way in which he praised this deal.
Yeah, Steve Baker, perhaps the biggest critic of where we've been over the past few years, a real champion for the ERG. He's come round and he's part of the deal, and he's been brilliant in putting this together.
It's amazing what a ministerial car will do, isn't it?
Very cynical, Nigel. No, the point I'm making is that Steve believes in it, as the rest of us do. It's a fantastic deal. It's a fantastic outcome. The idea of having frictionless trade, no barriers to trade at all, trade flowing freely east to west across the Irish Sea is pretty big.
You say that. There are still going to be forms to fill in. It's still not going to be, you know, like London trading with Manchester. I mean, there will be some differences, but clearly better in terms of trade than it is now. Do you... and maybe this is an unfair question at this stage, do you believe when Sunak says there is a veto that there really is a veto?
I do believe it, because he said it in the chamber. We know today that the thing called the Stormont break is going to work. It means that up to 30 MLAs can vote against any measure that the EU wants to impose upon Northern Ireland. But let's be clear, 1,700 laws ripped up, Barely 3% of what's going to be enforced in Northern Ireland will be applicable to the European Union. This is a massive result. And I used the word seismic this morning. This is a big result of the Conservative Party, but more importantly, it's a huge result for the Union and for Northern Ireland.
OK, now why don't you put your earpiece back in, because we're going to go back to Northern Ireland. We're going to be joined by a former colleague of mine in the European Parliament, Jim Allister, who, of course, was an MEP, now leads Traditional Union Voice, a party in Northern Ireland that's been very, very critical of much of the Brexit deal. But Jim also a KC. Jim, on the legal basis here, how much does the Windsor framework actually change in law?
Well, not enough, Nigel, because Northern Ireland remains the only part of the United Kingdom continue to be within the EU single market and therefore subject to the vast plethora of laws which were brought in to enforce the single market. And of course, that brings in the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. And to add to that, Northern Ireland is the only part of the United Kingdom to continue to be subject to the EU's customs code. And that is why, in consequence, we have a border in the Irish Sea, which it will still be there. And there will not be unfettered trade under this framework from GB, because even every load of goods you have to supply to a foreign jurisdiction the manifest of what's on your lorry of goods. And before it arrives in Northern Ireland, you have to supply a customs declarations covering 21 different items of data. So there is no comparison between sending goods from London to Glasgow and sending goods from London to Belfast. Belfast, because under the protocol, is treated as EU territory. We have to go through on the basis of the customs code, which is that GB not having remained in that customs code is treated as a foreign country, and therefore you're subject.
But Jim,
to all
it is. I mean, I understand what you're saying. It is not completely unfettered trade, and I said that before I got you on the programme. It is, of course, though, a lot better than the current situation, isn't it?
Well, the current situation was wholly punitive and deliberately so by the EU. And of course, the other thing about remaining in the EU single market, the long-term consequence is that as GB diverges and makes its own rules for its market, Northern Ireland is tethered to the EU orbit and therefore becomes more and more detached from its main market in GB and detached from its position within the United Kingdom, and is forced by dint of the single market rules to enter and align with the EU's orbit, and in this case in particular the Republic of Ireland's orbit. And therefore Northern Ireland slowly but surely is diverged from the United Kingdom, and that may well be, and I think is, the ultimate political objective of the protocol.
It may well be. Jim, I understand those points you make very, very clearly. On the ECJ, it was fascinating, wasn't it, that when the RTE journalist asked the question, Sunak refused to answer it, there was an instinctive response from Ursula von der Leyen that the ECJ will still be the final arbiter. About that, there is, I think, no dispute at all.
Absolutely.
The argument, of course, that the government will make is it'll be used very rarely, etc. Final thought, Jim, from you. The document that was produced, the Prime Minister in his statement said there will be a veto. You know, up to 30 MLAs can raise an objection and ultimately we can veto new EU law. Do you believe that legally to be true?
There's no veto within Stormont. As a commentator here in Northern Ireland accurately described it, it means that someone sitting in the back of the car can say to the driver, would you be so kind as to apply the brake? And the driver, being the United Kingdom government, can, in its own discretion, decide to do so or not. The veto would rest with the United Kingdom government, which on past form will be in no mood to upset the EU. So I think the veto is a con and a mirage rather than a reality. But the fundamental is, if Northern Ireland is to continue as part of the United Kingdom, then we must be given the Brexit that the rest of the United Kingdom got, rather than being left behind as we have been. And this agreement does not diminish the fact that we've been left behind within the EU.
Jim, will the DUP agree to this in your view?
I think they'd be very foolish to. They will be under immense pressure. I think there are a number of prominent DUP people who see the issues very clearly. So I trust that they will stick to their guns, as it were, and not fall foul of this. Because if they do, then make no mistake about it, Northern Ireland increasingly will drift apart from GB. And, you know, if you can create an all-Ireland economically, which is the purpose of the protocol, it's a short step, create an all-Ireland politically. And that's the intent of this protocol.
Jim Allister, thank you very much indeed for joining us. James Sunderland stayed with me through that. I mean, it's a pretty depressing story. And he's right. You know, they have been victimised in the most appalling way. I think you and I would agree on that. There is a point here, though, isn't there, that if the United Kingdom chooses, if we, Great Britain, choose to start diverging from EU law, we will find ourselves being, Northern Ireland and us, will become further and further apart, won't we?
Well, let's not run before we can walk. Brexit's been very complex. We know that very difficult. This is about balancing.
But this is a long-term decision that we're talking about here. That's what I'm really saying.
It is. Devil's in the detail. We need to look at the detail. That's what the DUP are doing right now, as indeed the ERG are. But this is about balancing the pursuit of perfection against the application of pragmatism. We've come a long way with this deal. We're on a journey, so I suspect that we've got further to run still. But my view is that this is a fantastic outcome at this point in time. I would hope the DUP go for it. They're under real pressure to go for it, in my view. It's the right thing for the Union. It's the right thing for Northern Ireland.
Do you have sympathy with some of the points that Jim Allister just made?
Yes, but we have left the European Union. We've got a land border between Southern Ireland and, of course, Northern Ireland. And this, in my view, is a necessary compromise. The 3% is a small price to pay for what will be an effective outcome, which is frictionless trade between East and West and North and South.
Never say that here on GB News you don't hear both sides of the argument, because you do. In a moment, an extraordinary, and I'm personally delighted, Court of Appeal decision that ruled in favour of Arron Banks against Carol Cadwalla of The Guardian. We'll tell you more in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So your thoughts on will the DUP agree to what Rishi has negotiated? Ian says not if the ECJ remains as an influence. The veto is nonsense. Nick says no, the DUP won't agree to this deal and neither should any unionist giving up any sovereignty in the UK. It's not the job of the UK to protect the single market. If the EU wants to protect its market, put the border at its end, not slap bang in the middle of the UK's market. And only one of you thus far, Sean, says, the deal is good. I have a funny feeling the DUP will agree. I don't know. I honestly don't know what they're going to do. But it was interesting last night, I thought, Kate Hoey suggesting that if we cannot get back to any form of devolved government in Northern Ireland, then actually Westminster may have no choice but to go back to direct rule. Now, in the wake of that referendum result in 2016, and indeed Donald Trump winning the presidency in America in November of that year, there was an absolute tidal wave of conspiracy theory that somehow this could not have happened because the voters of the UK wanted to leave the European Union or wanted Donald J. Trump in the White House. No, there must have been some grand conspiracy behind it. And the easy one, of course, was Russia. Yes, it's Russia. Russian money and Putin, what done it? Now, that has comprehensively been trashed in the USA. But it's been one hell of a battle here in this country, and the man that has borne the brunt of this, well, I'm one of them, but I just ignored it all. But Arron Banks, who is a businessman, founder of Leave.eu, major funder, indeed, to the Brexit referendum campaign, he works in business. He felt his reputation was being seriously damaged by this, and he's been going through a very, very lengthy legal case. Now, in the High Court, his libel claim against Carol Cadwalladr, well, in a way, he failed because the judge said even though what she wrote wasn't true, she believed it to be true at the time, that was a public interest, and that no real damage had been done to Mr. Banks. I found the judgment absolutely, truly astonishing, and indeed very deeply worrying. Well, today, at the Court of Appeal, the judge has made it very, very clear that he says that having reviewed this case, I have concluded that the judge's errors have fatally undermined her conclusion. Referring to the earlier judgment, he also makes it clear that Mr. Banks has won damages. So you would think, on the face of it, a very major victory for Arron Banks. But Carol Cadwalladr, in reply, said this case has been absurdity after absurdity. Yes, Carol Cadwalladr, we would agree with you on that entirely. She then goes on to say, as ever, Banks and his henchmen are desperately trying to clutch victory from the jaws of defeat. Absurd to suggest this in any way is a win for him. It's cost him £2 million to have a judge establish he'd misled the public over his extensive relationship with Kremlin officials. Well, joining me on the line is one Arron Banks. Arron, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you?
Very well. Now, before we get to what Ms. Cadwalladr has been saying,
yes.
This for you, I'm guessing it's been a very, very long and I think quite exhausting and expensive journey. But this Court of Appeal judgment, give us your reaction to it, please.
Well, I'm delighted. It's vindication, despite what Carol may have said on Twitter after the judgment. The judge makes it perfectly clear that he found there was defamation, there was serious harm, and that she's going to have to pay damages. So I'm not quite sure how you spin that into a victory for journalism. I mean, it was clear from the beginning that Carol had no facts. She had a lot of conspiracy theories. And I think the original judge, I'm not going to comment on that, but I think the appeal court have put it right today, which is fantastic.
And you were put through an extensive investigation by the Electoral Commission, a long investigation by the National Crime Agency. How much damage, Arron Banks, did this do to you?
Well, I mean, obviously, business-wise, it's not great to have a National Crime Agency investigation and to be under suspicion, even though I obviously knew it was nonsense. You know, you take a situation where we freely admitted in a book we wrote that we had met the Russian ambassador. Maybe we shouldn't have, you know, with hindsight, but it was at a time when government ministers were freely mixing Russian ministers. There wasn't the same, you know, intensity about it. But I think, you know, the story she made up, it really came from the American thing as well, where they were trying to undermine the legitimacy of, you know, the American election and Brexit. And they came up with these wild stories. And then, of course, the politicians get onto the bandwagon. They write to the National Crime Agency. I think 50 MPs did. I haven't seen many apologies from those people that wrote. And it was complete nonsense from beginning to end. Now, in this defamation case, what's interesting is Carol never sought to defend it on the grounds it was true. What she said was that the judge had misunderstood what she had said and that she didn't mean it, even though the night before the appeal court hearing, she actually retweeted the defamation. So I think a lot of her own downfall was her own doing, because literally the day before the court hearing, she retweeted or tweeted the allegations afresh. You know, pretty disgraceful.
Well, Arron, you've won a great victory in the Court of Appeal today. Well done, you. And I think the implications for anyone who wants to get involved in politics. And no, thank you. And it just goes to show that any judgment in a court that says it's OK for journalists to write things that simply are not true, if they believe it to be true, that I hope this never, ever happens again. In a moment, we will talk about why it is so difficult for us to deport serious, dangerous criminals and those who fail asylum claims.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
It's a truly shocking case. In December 2020, a plane was due to go to Jamaica, taking with it 23 foreign criminals. But 67 members of Parliament wrote a letter to say this is outrageous. It's the Windrush scandal writ large. And Naomi Campbell and other celebrities got involved to say this is absolutely beastly. And the deportations didn't happen. Well, a few months afterwards, Ernesto Elliott, and if any of you have seen the video footage online of him fighting against another man with a machete in the street, it's all pretty brutal, bloody and awful stuff, committed murder. That murder would not have happened if he had been deported. But it isn't just him. You know, just last week in Glasgow, a failed African asylum seeker was convicted of rape. He'll serve up to 6 years in prison, probably more, probably less. The judge said when he's released, he faces a very high risk of deportation. Well, hang on. Had a failed asylum seeker been deported, this rape would never have happened. And I've got a long list here of failed asylum seekers committing serious crimes. So whether it's foreign criminals, whether it's failed asylum seekers, we appear to be literally incapable of deporting almost anybody. I wonder why this is. Well, Ivan Sampson is, of course, an immigration lawyer and a regular on this show. Why, Ivan, why are we so... I mean, this case is ghastly, but it's one of many. Why are we so impotent?
Well, we've got strong laws to deport people. In fact, if you commit an offence which carries 12 months or more imprisonment, it's automatic, subject to human rights. Now, but this...
maybe that's the key.
This case is exceptional because we've got this guilt factor for the Windrush. The Windrush connection has something to do with this case, I believe, that people felt that, you know, that they were being victimised in there. But if you look on the balance, how many people who win human rights claims go on to commit murder, you have to look at this in the balance. But I agree with you, if you commit serious criminal offences, then you should be deported. The laws are there to do that. Article 5.1 of the 71 Act gives the Home Secretary powers to deport someone on conducive to public good grounds. Again, if you commit an offence which carries more than 12 months of prison, automatic.
But you see, the last Home Secretary was Priti Patel. She was Home Secretary at the time of this Ernesto Elliott case. And she says that she found herself up against, you know, public opinion, celebrities, scores of Labour MPs, and human rights law. You know, I mean, and I know you're a supporter of the concept and the principle of human rights law, but doesn't it render us impotent to do things? If a judge, you know, if somebody can claim they've got a family connection here or whatever it is, I mean, isn't it time for a reappraisal, Ivan, is really what I'm saying?
I sympathise with the victim and his family, obviously, and cases like this justify what you're saying, but it's the price we pay for freedom and rights of individuals against state interference. It's sad, I agree, but It doesn't mean we just throw the whole of the legislation out.
But are these okay? But these can be, rights that we have within our own country, or they're rights given to us and adjudged by the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. Shouldn't we be doing this? Shouldn't Brexit Britain, at a country that since Magna Carta has had a long tradition of actually doing this better than many other countries, aren't we fit and capable to do this on our own?
We are, but if we were to draft our own Human Rights Act, it would mirror the Human Rights Act we have now. These principles are fundamental protections for every human being.
Yes, but at least...
Drafted by UK lawyers, by the way.
But at least, and we're talking about ultimate arbiters in terms of the Northern Irish relationship, at least then the ultimate arbiter would be our Supreme Court, not a court in Strasbourg.
I've always said to you that if I'm going to challenge the government, I don't want that state's court looking at my challenge. I'd much rather have an outside arbiter if you're challenging a state. That's got to be fair.
Ivan and I agree on many things, but not this, but we'll debate this again and again and again. And very interesting that Rishi Sunak made it very clear in the chamber last night that we will stay part of ECHR. What the Farage moment? Cricket. It's growing all over the world. There is now an international global T20 league, and a new record was established this week when the Isle of Man T20 cricket team. Now, this men's team, they've raced up from being 77th in the world to 39th in the world with convincing wins over Romania, Turkey and many others. They came up against Spain and they were bowled out in 8.4 overs for a grand total of 10. Spain then went in to bat. The first ball was a wide and a no ball. The first real ball went for 6 and the second real ball went for 6. It established a world record in many ways. The odd thing was the Isle of Man in the morning had actually scored a very respectable 134 in their 20 overs. Rotten luck, Isle of Man. Don't give up. Keep going. In a moment, it's Talking Pints. I'm going to be joined by Tiff Needell. Now, he, of course, a former racing driver himself, but very much a big TV career in motorsport. We'll discuss all of that in just a moment.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
It's that time of the day. Yes, it's Talking Pints. Tiff Needell joins me. Not
Cheers,
Needle, Needell. I got it
Needell,
right.
I know.
Needell, I got it right. Cheers.
Cheers, very nice.
Now, Tiff, the young Tiff, growing up and clearly just an avid fanatic about speed, motor racing, cars, engines. Was this, I mean, literally from knee-high to a grasshopper?
So my dad actually went to work near Brooklands before the war.
Yep.
And so he was lured into those aero engine monsters going around the Brooklands banking. And sadly, of course, that was closed with the factories, the aircraft factories. After, when I was born in the 50s, Goodwood opened. He took me down to Goodwood. And I still remember the first time I climbed up the big earth bank and peered over the top and saw these loud, noisy, smelly, colourful machines being wrestled through the corners. You know, all I wanted to be was a racing driver.
Because Goodwood still does this stuff every year. The Festival of Speed, huge audiences go.
Because I raced them. I've raced every revival meeting. So for me, it's so nostalgic because I was the genuine sort of kid on the terrace that actually became the star on the pitch, you know, because it's very rare.
Who were the great heroes as a kid growing up?
Well, certainly was Jim Clark. Jim Clark was my utter idol, you know. And but you know, living on the wrong side of the rail. I was born in Weybridge, Surrey, but people always think, oh, silver spoon, Daddy paid for it. But my day was useless. He was a naval architect, designed boats, and he moved into Weybridge, Surrey in about 1948 and rented a flat. Didn't want one of these mortgage things to tie him down.
Yep.
He was renting the same flat for 20 years. So we lived in, you know, sort of Monty Python's things, you know. We had no telly, no car, certain periods, no fridge, no... It's amazing how growing up in the 50s, how different it is, like a Monty Python sketch.
How much the world has changed.
How much the world has changed. And my three young sons keep my feet on the ground, you know, mustn't go, you know, can't look back too often. But anyway, so, you know, I went off to...
So how do you go from being a young fan, how do you... I mean... You know, I read a story that the first car that you raced, you actually won in the competition.
Yeah. This was well, I went down to the racing driving school at Brands, all my savings, when I was 17, borrowed Mum's Morris 1000 and went down. I did the racing school then, got a feel for it. But I had no chance of buying a car, you know. I thought if I spent all my money doing it, I'd meet a millionaire, or preferably a millionairess in Weybridge that'd sponsor me or something. But so I won this car in this magazine competition. So I won a Formula 4 racing car in the Autosport magazine with a computer trailer. So now I was I was a civil engineer trainee and did a university course. So for 5 years, I was a civil engineer by day, a mechanic in my little lock-up garage by night. And every weekend, I was the van driver, the mechanic and the racing driver. And in those days, you could do it. That's what was so beautiful about before science made cars so much more complicated to
And
run.
so many different layers, of course, of motor racing. So many different categories. And you kind of... well, in car terms, went through every single one of those gears through time.
Because I came up through the Formula 4, I got voted the most promising young British driver. I bubbled to the top of the national rankings, and then got a professional drive with the Formula 3 team, and then a Formula 1 scholarship sponsored by Durex, obviously. It was very important, which is a true story. And then I finally got that call to be on the Grand Prix grids. Only briefly, sadly, but I got the Grand Prix drive that I dreamed of, and it meant so much to me.
And that must have been pretty incredible.
Well, it was, because, you know, I didn't think I was going to get it. I was only substituting for an injured driver, so it was only a short-term deal. But in those days, 30 cars used to turn up, and only the fastest 24 got the grid. So first you had to qualify.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the quickest car, the Ensign, that I was in. So I was so chuffed, because I ended up on the back row of the grid for the 1980 Belgian Grand Prix.
But you were there.
And alongside me was one of my schoolboy heroes, Emerson Fittipaldi, the world champion. So me, Emerson Fittipaldi. It was a magic moment, but I didn't get stuck into Formula 1, but then I luckily moved out and, you know, I did 14 Le Mans.
Not until
races.
you'd had a bit of an incident with Nigel Mansell.
Well, that was later. That was later when we did touring cars together.
But
oh no!
You reached the top, as you say. You may not have stayed there very long, but you reached the very top. But then you seem to get, Tiff, this extraordinary break, and you start to move into broadcasting.
I know.
And you're teamed up with this extraordinary fellow, Murray Walker. And I think of, and I'm a sports nut.
Yeah.
You know, I love all sports. I can't help it. I always have, I always will. And we all have favourite commentators on the football, the cricket, whatever.
Yeah.
But somehow, even into his 80s, and of course he'd been an army officer on D-Day. He was much older than people realised he was. But somehow, Murray Walker's enthusiasm, commentating on any form of race. You're a very lucky young man to be teamed up.
One of the nicest men I've ever met in the world. And the funny thing, all my life was just always by accidents. You know, I won that car, was luck. And I was just still trying to be right. All I wanted to be was a racing driver. And I got called into the commentary box. They didn't really have many expert analysts in those days. So I was one of the first expert analysts. So they sat me next to Murray Walker, Murray, you know. So I did the little, you know, did the commentating and talked about the incidents and stuff, you know. But the fact that I did that for the BBC was what then led to my voice being known to get the Top Gear gig, which came by accident as well.
Yeah, and you go on to Top Gear. You're pre-Clarkson. You're pre-Clarkson. But, you know, Clarkson joins, and Quentin Wilson, of course.
Quentin Wilson.
Joins, and you're there.
It took off. I mean, just
as this thing and it's the beginning, isn't it, of Top Gear becoming this extraordinary global brand. What is it about that programme that made it?
I don't know. It was just, you know, I only got the gig because Chris Goffey broke an ankle, and so I did a one-off. So I thought, it looks a bit boring, this turning a steering wheel. So if I give it a bit of a kick. So I made the car slide a lot, and the producers were so amazed that I could do this and talk at the same time that I came back more and more. And I said, Jeremy came in and brought this amazing humour to his presentation. So you say Quentin came along and took a lot of bollocks about second-hand cars. But it just gelled, and it just, I think, you know, me driving cars sideways and Jeremy's humour and Quentin's amazing history and classic cars and stuff. And of course, we've got Vicky Butler-Henderson and other characters came in, and it, you know, the mid-90s, it was just huge. But
and Clarkson, what was he like to work with?
Well, wonderful. I mean, he was a baffling idiot, like he still is, but, you know, he's a wonderful...
Are you still friends with him?
Yeah, I still see him. I'm a football fan. I'm a Southampton football, but he's Chelsea, so I saw him for a beer last weekend, and Southampton beat Chelsea.
I know, I saw that. Chelsea having a very tough time.
But Jeremy gets himself into trouble, but he is an idiot, but he's made some wonderful television, you know, with Cars and Top Gear, and his military documentaries he made.
Well, do you know what? I have to say, the thing he did on Arnhem about his first father-in-law and the Victoria Crossing one was one of the most astonishing programmes I've seen. I mean, he clearly is a very brilliant journalist. He's had to apologise a bit recently, but, you know...
Like, you know, some people go a bit too far sometimes.
It may have happened occasionally.
Loud characters go too far.
It may be possible. You do all of that, but then you finish up with your own Fifth Gear gig at Channel 5, which you did for year after year after year. I mean, you've had a very... long career.
Still going. I'm on Love Cars now. We've got a new TV series doing Love Cars on the road. And
what is it, Tiff, that makes you work on telly?
I'm just still a kid with cars, and I think that's what comes through. I think the whole thing when I ever test a car, people will never drive a Ferrari or Lamborghini or a Pagani Zonda. And I always feel like I'm bringing people on board.
So is it a schoolboy enthusiasm?
Yes, and I want other people to understand that. People that won't ever get the chance to drive those cars. So I always feel like I'm bringing you with me into the telly, and, you know, and it's enjoyable. I don't have to act enjoyable, you know.
I can tell.
It just
No, I love it. And Formula One this season, where are we? What do you think?
Yeah, this weekend it's the Max versus Lewis show again. It's a bit showbiz now. The cars are very high-tech, rumoured too many aerodynamicists are getting in charge of these cars. They can't follow. We have to have these stupid wings that open at the back to overtake, which people like me don't really like. We want the cars... Yeah. But it's Drive and Survive. It's become this sort of pantomime show. That's on telly.
And it's a global brand.
Yeah, it's massive, and it's more. But nowadays, I think a lot of motorsport events and other events, you go to the event rather than to watch the race. There's an after show.
It's a day out.
It's a day out. You go to Monaco.
Yeah.
Monaco's an awful place for Grand Prix cars.
You can't see
No. But they come home
socially,
a great weekend in Monaco with a Grand Prix. Yeah.
Well, Tiff, I have to say, I've not had anybody on Talking Pints who clearly loves his job more than you do. And you've shared that with us, and I thank you for it.
My pleasure. Cheers.
Thank you. OK, it's time for Barrage the Farage. You sent in questions. I've no idea what they're going to be. Here goes. Ryan asks me, is the Windsor framework Sunak's Maastricht moment? Well, you can view Maastricht in many ways. You could say that Major achieved a great success, or you can say that it paved the way for UKIP and the great political rebellion that happened in our country. I don't know whether the DUP are going to go for this or not. What I do think is that the opposition within the Conservative Party has pretty much, from what I can see, melted away. Des asks me, has Charles III signed the end of the monarchy? Not yet, Des, but he must not be dragged into politics. He must not be dragged into constitutional abominations, which I think is the sort of language that the next GB News host would use. Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me. Jacob, first things first, we have a mutual love of cricket.
Oh, yes.
I sat up till 3 o'clock this morning to watch us lose by 1 run.
You're a hardier soul than I am. I gave up when the 8th wicket fell. I thought, that's it. I'm going to go to bed now.
But I stuck with it. You've just been at an ERG meeting. What is the mood of the troops?
Well, if people listen between 8 and 9, they may find out.
A little hint.
A little hint. People are looking at the detail, and that's important. We have learnt from Maastricht that game, set and match may be more spin than reality.
So this is about the legal basis?
Right. That's absolutely right, yeah.
And are we getting any nearer, or is that going to take more time?
That'll take time. It needs to be looked at thoroughly. They've issued dozens and dozens of pages of documents. The EU has issued documents that aren't entirely the same as the documents issued by His Majesty's government.
How very interesting. Yeah, this one will run and run. And what else tonight, Jacob, will be coming up on your show?
Well, we're going to be discussing cars and whether electric motors are any good or whether they break down immediately, and whether you're better off having a nice petrol engine, as I've got. Actually, I've got several nice petrol engines, and we're going to be discussing energy prices because I had brief responsibility for them as BEI's secretary.
You did, and interesting, isn't it? The wholesale price of natural gas, of oil, you know, we're back down at very reasonable levels. The petrol pumps are beginning to catch up. I've also noticed that the diesel unleaded disparity is now down to sort of 18, 20p. But we're still paying an awful lot for electricity, aren't we?
We are, yes. Well, this will be a longer discussion another time, but we have all sorts of green levies and means that have made our energy more expensive.
You see, folks, it isn't just me. I've not been filling your heads with propaganda. It's true. We've loaded onto your energy bills all sorts of excessive costs, and it's all gone to very wealthy foreign companies that own wind farms or Chinese companies producing blades. Jacob is going to pick up that theme. I'm done for now. Back with you at 7 o'clock tomorrow. First, though, the all-important weather.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. Cloudy and showery weather will continue for many of us over the next 24 hours. Showers will ease later, leading to a touch of frost in some places, but for most it stays cloudy because this area of high pressure, which is dominant across the UK at the moment, is continuing to bring a feed of cloud and some showers in from the North Sea. So the most frequent showers into the east and across central areas, but a few of them making their way into Wales and the southwest. However, the earlier showers and the longer spells of rain in Kent do tend to move away. Clearer skies moving in here overnight with the frost, and western Scotland, lengthy clear spells, so a frost here as well. But where we keep the cloud, 3 to 5 Celsius on the thermometer as we start off Wednesday. And we've still got further showers to come. They're going to continue to feed into northern and central England, southeast Scotland, parts of Wales, 1 or 2 into the southwest of England as well. But actually by the afternoon, many of these showers will ease. There'll be a better chance of some breaks in the cloud developing, some brighter spells, especially towards the south, the west, and more especially for western Scotland. 7 to 10 Celsius, not far from average for the time of year, but it'll feel more like 3 or 4 on that North Sea coast, given the breeze. That breeze will continue to bring some showers into the north and east of Scotland, northern and eastern England, 1 or 2 into Wales on Wednesday night. But actually, the best chance of clear spells is across southern counties of England, South Wales, northern and western Scotland. And it's here where we'll see a frost as we start off Thursday. Otherwise, 3 to 5 Celsius, a very similar picture compared with the last few days. A lot of cloud feeding in and a few showers. However, Thursday, I'm optimistic, It does look like a brighter day for many, especially in the south and later on for Scotland as well. The cloud breaking up nicely, and by Friday, many places will be looking sunnier, although there'll still be areas of cloud floating about. Saturday, much colder weather sweeps into the far north.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories.